All right, welcome in everybody to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little bit different.
Yeah, this is going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. We're talking all about how we learn and specifically what's called strategic processing. So
Yeah.
not just like, grinding it out and studying harder, but how do you actually learn best? And by the end of this, you're going to have, I think, some real insights into making your learning more effective, more
Yep.
targeted,
For you.
more you.
Exactly.
And we've got an awesome source that one of you lovely listeners sent to us. It is a research review called Toward a Dynamic Multidimensional Research Framework for Strategic Processing.
Oh, yeah, I love this one. It's great. It is not just sort of abstract ideas.
Yeah.
It really looked at a ton of data about how students learn. They actually synthesized findings from 134 different studies.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh.
published between 2011 and 2016.
So they really did their homework on this. I mean, that's impressive.
It's a lot of research to go through.
It is. So our mission here is to extract the juice. We're going to juice this research.
Yeah.
We want to give you the most useful, the most practical takeaways so that you can understand what truly works when it comes to learning. And so you can kind of absorb information efficiently, effectively, without feeling like you're drowning in it.
Right. Yeah, because it can be overwhelming. You get all this information, all this advice. How do you know what's good advice? What's going to actually help you?
Yeah, and it seems like one of the initial things that stood out to both of us is this idea that how strategic processing actually develops isn't really as well understood as maybe we think it is.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you think, right?
Yeah.
Could the techniques, the learning strategies that really click for you now, could those be totally different from what worked for you when you were younger? Or maybe what will work for you as you get even more experience in whatever field you're interested in, right?
Right, because it's not static.
It's not static. And actually, the paper uses this, I think, really cool analogy to kind of illustrate this idea. They talk about how, a single gene in a fruit fly
Okay.
can have one job early on in the fruit fly's life and then totally different job later on.
Yep.
The example they give is that gene, it could become like an actual structural part of a wing.
Wow.
So if a single gene can change so much over time,
Yeah.
and do such different things, it's really likely that a learning strategy also isn't going to have a single unchanging function.
Yeah, because you're not a fruit fly, but
Yeah.
you're more complex.
You're a little more complex than that.
And so your learning is going to be more complex. This is really cool because the research is actually showing that there's a shift happening in how we even understand learning itself.
Yeah.
So you think about how, in genomics, right, we used to have this very simple idea that one gene equals one trait. And now it's no. There are multiple genes interacting with each other, and they're interacting with the environment, and it's all very complex and dynamic. Well, this research is saying, it's the same with learning. We're moving away from this idea that learning is just these discrete actions you take.
Like a checklist.
Yeah, it's a checklist, and it's no, it's much more interconnected. It's more fluid. It's more dynamic.
And I think that helps to explain why, you look at research on learning strategies and you get some studies that show these really strong positive results, right?
Yes.
But then, other studies that seem like, wait, hold on, those contradict each other. It's like, well, maybe the lens we're using to analyze learning just isn't nuanced enough. Maybe we're missing the context. Maybe we're missing, the way that these different factors actually work together to make a strategy successful in one situation, but then not in another.
Yeah. So it's not about finding the best learning strategy in the world in a vacuum. It's about understanding how all these strategies fit together into your own process, into specific situations.
Yeah.
Now, the paper also touched on something called levels of processing.
Yes.
Can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So levels of processing, it's this classic distinction between how we process information at a deep level versus at a surface level.
Okay.
So think about the work of Craik and Lockhart, who looked at how we remember things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their idea was basically that when you really engage with the meaning of some information, you process it more deeply.
Right.
Which then leads to better memory later on.
Okay.
And then there's Martin and Selyo who kind of applied this to reading.
Okay.
They found that, when students really tried to understand the underlying ideas in a text, so a deep approach, they did much better than students who just read the words, just kind of skimmed it. More of a surface approach.
Right. So the general assumption then is that deeper is always better.
That is usually the assumption.
Mm-hmm.
But what's cool about this research review is it highlights that it's not quite so black and white,
Oh,
you know? Like sometimes a surface level strategy, something like memorization, can be effective. Like it really depends what you're trying to learn
right.
and why you're trying to learn it.
Right. So like if you just need to know like a list of terms for a quick quiz, just memorizing them might be good enough.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. It's all about the context. What are you actually trying to achieve?
Okay, so it's not one size fits all. Makes sense.
Totally.
So then the review kind of dives into how researchers have actually thought about strategic processing, and it breaks it down into two main categories. So whether learning strategies are seen as kind of stable, like just how you are, which is called trait-based,
Yeah.
or more adaptable, more changing state-based.
Right. Like a state of mind almost. It can change.
Yeah. So let's start with trait-based models, because I think those are like the classic ones that we all kind of like have in our heads.
Right. These are kind of the earlier models of learning. So you have things like, Biggs's approaches to learning, where he talks about like people who tend to reproduce information versus people who try to really internalize the understanding or organize knowledge.
Right.
And then there's Vermont's patterns of adaptive learning, where he talks about like meaning directed learners, reproduction directed, application directed.
So like someone who's just trying to memorize facts versus someone who's really trying to get the concepts and how they all fit together.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And these were initially seen as like these stable traits, right? Like this is just how you learn. But I think, as research has gone on, they've recognized that even these trait-based perspectives, they've kind of had to evolve. Because we're realizing that, these learning approaches, they aren't quite as fixed as maybe we thought they were.
So, like, even if you do have a tendency towards one style, that doesn't mean you're stuck with it forever.
Exactly.
That's actually really encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
Because, if you felt like you were always stuck with memorization and you're like, I'm never going to be a deep learner.
Right.
This is like, there's hope.
There's hope.
So that brings us to the state-based models, which really kind of emphasize this idea that things are more fluid.
Yeah. So we've got Alexander's model of domain learning, or MDL for short.
Yeah.
And basically what this model suggests is that as you progress, as you go from being like a novice in some subject to being more expert, your use of strategies changes.
Okay.
So when you're first starting out, you might rely more on those surface level strategies. You're just trying to get familiar with the basics. But then as you kind of gain knowledge, as your interest grows, as you get deeper into it, you naturally tend to adopt those deep level strategies.
So it's like, think about learning a new language. At first, you're just like trying to memorize vocabulary words, but then eventually you start to like think in the language. You start to understand the nuances.
It's like you're building a foundation, right? And then once you have that foundation, then you can start to build these more complex structures on top of it.
Yeah, you need that base.
You need the base.
And then there's Siegler's overlapping waves theory.
Yes.
Which I think you said was OWT.
OWT.
Now that one's a little more like granular, right?
OWT is really cool because it kind of zooms in on how we learn. And it suggests that actually, a lot of times we're using a whole bunch of different strategies all at once. Like it's not like you're just using one.
Right, at the same time. Yeah.
At the same time, we've got all these different strategies that we're using, and then our reliance on them changes over time with experience. So, we're constantly discovering new strategies. We're trying them out. We're starting to favor the ones that work best for us.
Yeah.
Our choices become more tailored to the situation, and our overall strategy use just gets more efficient over time.
So OWT is like, it's looking at these like moment-to-moment adjustments that you make as you're learning.
Yes.
Versus MDL, which is like the big picture developmental journey.
Exactly. Yeah, you've got it.
Okay. Now, there are also these like deeper philosophical differences that underlie all of this, right?
Yeah, totally. So the paper talks about this thing called the Cartesian split mechanistic tradition.
Catchy.
Versus the relational tradition.
Okay, so I'm already lost.
Yeah, I know. These names they're a little bit
academic,
jargony, but I think they're really key to understanding, why these different models even exist and why they sometimes seem to contradict each other.
Okay, so break it down for us in plain English.
Okay, so the Cartesian split mechanistic tradition, basically, it focuses on the differences between learners. So like, why do some students do better than others?
Okay.
And it often emphasizes the amount of processing. So it's kind of like, thinking of it as like a machine,
Hmm.
right? Some
Right.
machines or learners, they're just built with more powerful processors.
Right. So like some people are just smarter.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea there. Whereas the relational tradition, it focuses on the changes within a learner over time.
Okay.
So how your learning actually evolves.
Right.
And it emphasizes the quality of your strategies and when you choose to use them. It's much more about like the context, the interaction of all these different factors.
So that's like viewing learning as more of a system.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like a dynamic system.
Okay, so to just kind of put all this together then, it sounds like those trait-based models that we were talking about, which look at like kind of these stable differences between learners, those are more in line with that mechanistic tradition.
Right.
And then the state-based models, which focus on how individual learners change and adapt, those are more in line with the relational tradition.
You got it. You got it.
Okay, cool. So that brings us to the real meat of the research review here. And they really organized it around these key guiding questions.
Yeah, I think these are really helpful for us to kind of structure this conversation.
Totally. And the first one was about like what types of strategies have actually been researched.
Right. Like, what are people even looking at?
Yeah, exactly. So, are most studies looking at like very specific techniques or kind of broader combinations of strategies?
Yeah, so what they found is that most of the studies, like 72% of them, actually looked at these combinations of strategies.
Right.
So like groups of strategies, instead of just like zeroing in on one specific technique.
Right.
But the interesting thing is, the studies that did focus on a particular, very specific strategy, those were actually more likely to show those clear positive relationships with better learning outcomes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like maybe if we want to really understand what's working, we need to get more precise in what we're looking at.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about throwing a whole bunch of strategies together and see what happens.
Right. Okay. So what about the level of the strategies they looked at? Were they looking at surface level memorization,
Mm-hmm.
deep understanding, that metacognitive stuff?
So it was pretty interesting. There was like a pretty even distribution.
Uh,
So, a lot of the studies looked at all three together.
okay.
Surface, deep, metacognitive,
Yeah.
all together.
Gotcha.
But what's interesting is the studies that only looked at surface level strategies, those were actually the most likely to report positive findings.
Really?
Yeah. And then the ones that only looked at metacognitive strategies, those were actually more mixed. And then when they looked at all three together, mixed findings were the most common.
So this idea that like deep learning is just inherently superior, it's not quite that simple, is it?
It's not that simple, no.
And it's also interesting that just like, being aware of your own thinking processes doesn't automatically mean you're going to learn better.
Yeah. Like, it's not just about metacognition. It's about how all these different things fit together.
Right. So the interplay, the way they kind of dance together.
Exactly.
Okay, now the second guiding question was all about how these studies looked at the quantity, the quality, and the conditional use of strategies.
Yes. This one gets really, really practical, I think.
Yeah, because I think this is where people get tripped up a lot, right? It's like they think, oh, if I just study for hours and hours, I'm going to be fine.
Right. Or if I use all the strategies.
But it's not just about how much you do, it's how you do it. And it's like matching the right strategies to what you're actually trying to learn.
Totally. So quantity, meaning like how often you're using a strategy. That was the thing that was measured most often in all the studies. But the evidence really, really suggests that quality, so like how well you're actually using a strategy, and conditional use, like are you using the right strategy for the right situation, those are way more important for successful learning.
So it's like having like a Swiss Army knife, right? It has all these different tools on it, but if you don't know which tool to use or how to use it properly, it doesn't really matter that you have it.
Exactly. Exactly. You're not gonna get very far.
So do you have like a specific example of this from the research?
Yeah. They actually mentioned the study that showed how this specific guided strategy for like mass subtraction was way more effective than other subtraction methods.
Oh, interesting.
So that's a quality example. It's like
Right.
one strategy done really well leads to much better outcomes.
Makes sense.
And then there was another study that found that the effectiveness of different learning strategies actually varied depending on the type of mathematical operation being taught.
Oh, wow.
So, the best strategy for addition might not be the best for division.
Right.
That's conditional use. you know?
Yeah.
It's all about matching the strategy to the task.
So it's not just about like learning strategies, it's about being strategic.
Strategic about your strategy.
That's really meta. Okay, so the third guiding question was all about the factors, the things in your life that can kind of influence how you process information strategically.
Yeah, and they found a lot of interesting things there.
So what are some of those? Like what are the big ones?
So first of all, the actual subject matter you're learning
Okay.
made a difference. So studies in reading and writing, they often showed like more varied and sometimes contradictory results compared to like math or science. Yeah. And then the type of task also really mattered. So if you're doing something that's more complex, more open-ended, like, writing an essay where there's not one right answer, you tend to benefit more from deeper processing strategies.
Okay.
Whereas if it's a more structured task, something with a very specific solution, you might not need to go as deep.
Right.
And then finally, the student's goals.
Like why are you learning this thing in the first place?
Exactly. So if you're really focused on mastering the material, that was often linked to more adaptive learning. But that finding wasn't always consistent across the board.
Okay, so the big picture here is that, if you're doing something that requires like really deep thinking, you need to use deeper strategies. If it's just like facts and figures, maybe a simpler approach is okay.
Yeah. And then, your motivation, why you're even learning this thing, can also influence your approach.
Yeah, makes sense. So it's all about context.
It's all about context.
Yeah. And then the final guiding question had to do with how all this changes over time, right? Like as you're learning in different situations. And I think this really ties back into the state-based models of learning.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what did they find? Like, can your approach actually change over time?
So most of the studies they looked at were these between subjects studies,
Okay.
which means they just compared different groups of people at one point in time.
Right, so like a snapshot.
Yeah, snapshot. But there were some, not as many, but some longitudinal studies which actually follow the same people over a longer period.
Okay.
And those longitudinal studies showed that, yes, people's use of learning strategies can actually change over time. It can increase, it can decrease, it can stay the same. It really depends on the strategy and the context.
Sure.
But the really cool thing was that the ability to be adaptable, the ability to like change your strategy use, that actually tended to improve with training.
Okay.
And just experience in the subject.
So you can actually train yourself to be a better learner.
Yeah. Like the more you do it, the better you get at figuring out what works for you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so now we've gone through all these guiding questions and all this research. So what's the big takeaway here?
So I think the main takeaway is that if we want to understand how people learn effectively, just looking at strategies as these isolated tools, like that mechanistic tradition, it's not enough.
Right.
Like all these mixed results we were talking about, those really point to the need for a more dynamic view, like a multidimensional perspective.
Okay.
Which is more that relational tradition, right?
Right.
Acknowledging that it's complex. Learning is complex.
Well, not just about the tools. It's about how you use them, when you use them, why you use them.
Exactly. So it's not just about having a big toolbox of strategies. It's about understanding how to use each one effectively.
Right. And that can actually change over time.
Right. Like you're not stuck with one way of learning forever.
Awesome. And so based on all of this, the researchers actually proposed this thing called the dynamic multidimensional framework for understanding strategic processing. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So the framework basically has a few main components. So first of all, it emphasizes this idea that how we use learning strategies is not fixed, right? It's going to change as we develop, as we become more expert.
Right.
It also emphasizes that different strategies don't work in isolation, right? They interact with each other in these like really complex ways.
Right. So they're like all influencing each other.
Exactly. And then, when we're studying learning strategies, we need to go beyond just how often they're being used and really focus on how well they're being used and are they the right fit for the situation.
Okay.
And then finally, this framework, it really underscores this constant interaction between you as the learner, the task itself, and then the learning environment. So, you have all your existing knowledge, your interests, your beliefs, your goals.
Right.
The task itself has, a certain structure. It has prompts. It has a certain domain, a certain difficulty level.
Right.
And then the environment you're in.
Right. So like, is it a classroom? Is it online.
Exactly. Yeah. And all of these factors are constantly interacting and influencing each other.
Okay.
And what I really like about this framework is that it moves away from those simple labels,
Right.
like deep versus surface.
Right.
And it encourages us to consider how effective the strategy actually is for you
Yeah.
in that specific context.
Right. Because a strategy that leads to deep understanding for you in one situation might not do that in a different situation.
Exactly.
So what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listener today?
I think the most important thing is that effective learning is much more than just like passively absorbing information
Right.
or just using any old strategy.
Mhm.
It's about actively using the right strategies, using them well, and using them in the right situation.
It's about being smart about it.
Yeah, you have to think about it.
Yeah.
And this ability to be strategic, that evolves over time.
Right.
And it's shaped by you, your characteristics, and that learning environment you're in.
So it's kind of like a lifelong journey. You're always honing your skills as a learner.
Totally.
That's really cool.
And on that note,
Hmm.
I have like a little final thought for you to ponder.
Okay, hit us.
I want you to think about the last time that you felt like you really learned something new and you really understood it deeply.
Okay.
Like, what strategies did you use?
Yeah.
Were you focused on just like getting through it, or were you really trying to grasp the concepts? And how did like the nature of the thing you were learning, how hard was it? How structured was it? Was it something you were interested in? How did all that affect your approach?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I think, if this conversation has kind of sparked your curiosity, there's so much more to explore, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you can look into metacognition, which is just a fancy word for like thinking about how you think.
Yeah, thinking about thinking.
You can you can look at the idea of learning styles, but, maybe approach that with a more critical eye.
Right, right. With this dynamic perspective in mind.
Yeah, because it's not, set in stone.
No, no.
And then, there's tons of research on specific learning strategies, so find the ones that are relevant to you.
Exactly. And the more you understand how you learn, the more effective you can be.
Right. You can kind of unlock your potential as a learner.
Totally, totally.
Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive. I feel like my brain is like buzzing with new insights.
Me too.
So thank you all for joining us on this journey into the fascinating world of strategic processing.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.